Arthur Morgan knelt in the Montana mud, rain carving channels down his weathered face. His hat trembled in his hands. The words had already left his mouth, hanging in the storm air like a gunshot echo. "Let me work for you. I'll give you strong children." Vera Washington stood on her porch, shotgun steady in her grip. Lightning painted her dark skin silver. Her eyes held the kind of stillness that came from watching men die and cattle freeze. She studied this stranger who'd crawled out of the storm with desperation carved into every line of his frame. "Get off my land." The words came quiet, final, but her finger never found the trigger. Arthur's shoulders sagged. Three ranch hands flanked him, hands resting on their gun belts. The rain hammered the wooden boards above Vera's head. Thunder rolled across the valley like judgment. "Please." The word cracked in his throat. "I got nowhere else to go." Vera's grip tightened on the shotgun. She'd built the largest cattle operation in the Montana Territory by reading men correctly. This one carried shame like a brand. His desperation felt different than the drifters who usually found her door. Deeper, more honest. The storm had been building for 3 days. Arthur had ridden into Sweetwater Ridge on Tuesday morning with $2 and a lame horse. The town spread along the valley floor like spilled grain. Every rancher within 50 miles had turned him away before he'd even finished speaking. His name carried poison now. The blacklist followed him like shadow. He'd found shelter in the abandoned church, listening to rain drum against rotted shingles. Hunger gnawed at his ribs. His horse needed feed and rest. Winter was coming fast to the high country. That's when he'd heard about the Washington woman. The banker Micah Bell had been talking loud in the saloon. Vera Washington needed ranch hands before the snow came. Her cattle would die without proper winter preparation. But no man in the territory would take orders from a woman, especially not her kind. Arthur had sat in the corner, nursing watered whiskey and watching Belle's pale face twist with satisfaction. The banker enjoyed discussing other people's troubles, made his own seem smaller. "She's got more land than she can handle," Belle had said. "More cattle than sense, but pride won't keep her stock alive when the blizzards come." The other men had nodded. Some had worked for Vera's late husband before his heart gave out 5 years back. They respected her business sense, admired her strength, but working for her was different than working with her husband. Arthur had finished his drink and walked out into the rain. He'd found Vera at the bank the next morning. She'd been arguing with Belle about a loan extension. Her voice carried the educated precision of someone who'd fought for every word. Belle's responses dripped with false courtesy. "Miss Washington, you must understand the position this puts the bank in. Without adequate staffing, your winter survival seems unlikely." "The bank's position is secure," she'd replied. "My collateral exceeds the loan value by considerable margin." "Of course, but winter losses could change that equation rapidly." Arthur had pressed against the window, watching Vera's straight back. She wore a dark blue dress that spoke of prosperity. Her hair was pinned with silver combs. Everything about her projected success and control. But her hands had trembled slightly when she'd signed the papers. That evening, Arthur had learned more about Vera Washington from the hotel clerk. She'd inherited 300 head of cattle and 2,000 acres when her husband died. Most expected her to sell quickly. Instead, she doubled her holdings and tripled her herd. The clerk had spoken with grudging admiration. "She's got a head for business that shame most men, pays her debts, treats folks fair. But she's particular about who she trusts." Arthur had spent 2 sleepless nights weighing his options. He could ride south, try to outrun his reputation. Start fresh somewhere Dutch van der Berg's name meant nothing. But winter was coming. His horse was failing. His money wouldn't last a week. Or he could make a proposition so outrageous it might shock Vera Washington into giving him a chance. Now he knelt in her yard, watching water drip from the porch boards. His words had sounded desperate even to his own ears, but desperation was all he had left. Vera lowered the shotgun an inch. Her ranch hands shifted nervously. The storm was getting worse. "You got a name?" she asked. "Arthur Morgan." She considered this. Lightning illuminated the valley behind him. Her cattle would need shelter soon. The fences required repair before the heavy snows came. 3 men had quit last month rather than take her orders. 1 week, she said finally. Barn lodging. Prove you're worth the scandal you're asking me to endure. Arthur's relief nearly knocked him sideways. He struggled to his feet, mud sliding from his knees. You won't regret this. Vera studied his face for a long moment. Then she turned and walked into her house, leaving him standing in the rain with her 3 ranch hands watching every move. Thunder rolled again across the Montana sky. Arthur gathered his hat and walked toward the barn. Behind him, lamplight glowed in Vera Washington's windows. Neither of them knew that Dutch Van der Berg was already riding north, planning to reclaim what he believed Arthur had stolen from him, or that this desperate bargain struck in a storm would soon become the foundation for something neither had dared to hope for. The rain continued falling on the broken ground. Dawn came gray and cold over the Sweetwater Ranch. Arthur woke to frost coating the barn windows. His breath made clouds in the thin air. Outside, cattle lowed in the distance. The storm had passed but left the ground treacherous with ice. Vera appeared at the barn door as he was saddling his horse. She wore riding pants and a heavy coat. Her hair was braided back for work. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee without speaking. Wild horses in the north pasture, she said. 3 good men tried breaking them last month. All 3 quit. Arthur tested the coffee. Hot and bitter. Real coffee, not the chicory most ranchers serve their hands. How many horses? 6. The stallion's the problem. Black Mustang with white markings. Smart and mean. Arthur nodded. He'd worked with Mustangs before. They required patience more than strength. Most men tried to break their spirit. Better to earn their respect. They rode north through crystalline air. The mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. Vera sat her horse with easy grace. She'd grown up in the saddle. Her movements spoke of years spent working this harsh land. The wild horses stood in a grove of cottonwoods. The stallion raised his head as they approached. His coat gleamed black as coal. White blazed down his face. His eyes held intelligence and defiance. Arthur dismounted slowly. The other horses scattered, but the stallion held his ground. Steam rose from his nostrils. His muscles bunched with contained power. Previous men used ropes and force, Vera said quietly. Arthur pulled an apple from his saddlebag. He'd bought it with his last coins in town. The stallion's ears pricked forward. Arthur took 1 step, then another. His movement stayed smooth and deliberate. The stallion's head lowered slightly. Arthur extended the apple on his flat palm. The horse stepped closer, cautious, alert for any sudden movement. Soft lips brushed Arthur's hand. The apple disappeared in powerful jaws. Arthur stood perfectly still as the stallion evaluated him. Then he slowly reached up and touched the horse's neck. Vera watched from her saddle. Something shifted in her expression. Arthur had shown patience where others had shown force, understanding where they'd shown dominance. The next 3 hours passed in careful negotiation. Arthur used voice and touch more than rope. The stallion gradually accepted a halter. His breathing stayed calm. No fear clouded his dark eyes. When Arthur finally swung onto the horse's back, the stallion tensed but didn't buck. They walked in small circles, building trust 1 step at a time. How? Vera asked when Arthur dismounted. Respect works better than breaking. She studied his face. Most men would have bragged about their skill, made speeches about horse mastery. Arthur simply unsaddled the stallion and turned him loose with the others. They rode back in comfortable silence. The sun climbed higher, burning frost from the grass. Arthur noticed broken fence posts along the eastern boundary, wind damage from the recent storms. That afternoon, he repaired fencing without being asked. Vera found him at sunset, replacing rotted boards with fresh lumber. He'd found the supplies in her barn and inventoried what needed replacing. I didn't ask you to fix those. Arthur hammered another nail. Cattle will wander through come morning. She watched him work. His movements were economical, purposeful. He wasted no motion or material. The repairs would hold through winter storms. "Supper's ready," she said finally. Arthur cleaned his tools before following her inside. The house surprised him with its warmth. Books lined the walls. A piano stood in one corner. Vera had built more than just a cattle empire. She'd created a home. They ate beef stew and cornbread at her kitchen table. Arthur waited for permission before sitting. He kept his hat in his lap. The food was simple but well prepared. "You read?" she asked, noticing him glance at her books. "Some. Been a while since I had time for it." "Take whatever you want. Knowledge shouldn't gather dust." After supper, Arthur returned to the barn. But he carried a volume of Shakespeare under his arm. Vera had offered it without explanation. He'd accepted without thanks. Some gestures required no words. The week passed in steady rhythm. Arthur rose before dawn and worked until sunset. He gentled the remaining wild horses, repaired storm damage throughout the property, reinforced the cattle shelters against coming winter. Vera tested him constantly. She assigned impossible tasks with impossible deadlines. Arthur completed them without complaint. His hands bled from rope burns. His back ached from lifting fallen timber. He said nothing about either. On Thursday, she found him mucking stalls that hadn't been cleaned in months. The work was beneath any ranch foreman. Arthur had tackled it anyway. "Why?" she asked. "Horses deserve better." That evening in town, Arthur overheard two men discussing Vera at the general store. Their words carried casual cruelty, comments about her place, her presumptions, what she deserved. Arthur stepped between them and the door. His presence filled the narrow space. Both men fell silent. "Ma'am," he said to the store owner's wife, "Mrs. Washington needs these supplies loaded." The men backed away. Arthur said nothing to them. His stillness spoke louder than threats. They left quickly. The store grew quiet except for shuffling feet and rustling packages. Later, Vera asked what had happened in town. Word traveled fast in small places. Nothing worth repeating. But she saw the torn knuckles on his right hand. Someone had said too much. Arthur had responded with restraint rather than violence. The men had backed down rather than face consequences. Saturday brought the blizzard. Snow fell in thick sheets across the valley. Wind drove ice crystals horizontal. The temperature plummeted below zero. Arthur fought through whiteout conditions to check the cattle shelters. Several had collapsed under snow load. Without immediate repair, stock would freeze before morning. He worked alone in howling wind. His fingers grew numb despite heavy gloves. Ice formed in his beard. The lumber felt brittle in the cold. Each nail had to be driven carefully or the wood would split. Vera found him collapsed against the barn door near midnight. Hypothermia had claimed his strength. His lips were blue. His hands wouldn't close around tools anymore. She half carried him into her house, built up the fire until flames roared in the hearth, wrapped him in blankets and forced hot coffee between his chattering teeth. Arthur drifted in and out of consciousness. When fever broke 2 days later, he woke in Vera's guest bed. Sunlight streamed through clean windows. The storm had passed. "The cattle," he whispered. "Safe. Because of what you did." Arthur struggled to sit up. Vera pressed him back into the pillows. Her touch was gentle but firm. She tended him through the worst of it. "You could have died out there." Arthur met her eyes, brown and deep, holding questions she wasn't ready to ask. "Your ranch, your livelihood, wasn't going to let it fail." Something passed between them in that moment, understanding deeper than words. Arthur had risked everything for her dream, not because she'd asked, because he'd chosen to care about her success. That evening, when Arthur was strong enough to walk, Vera set 2 plates on her dining room table, real china with painted flowers, silver forks that caught lamplight. "Eat with me," she said, not an order, an invitation. Arthur took the offered chair. For the first time since arriving, he felt like more than hired help. The week had changed something between them, built foundation from shared work and mutual respect. Outside, snow continued falling on the healing land. Inside, 2 wounded people discovered they might not have to face the coming winter alone. The transformation had begun in silence, in gestures rather than words, in the quiet recognition that some partnerships transcend their desperate beginnings. Winter settled over the Sweetwater Ranch like a careful hand. Arthur's week had stretched into a month, then two. Vera never mentioned his trial period ending. He never asked about permanent employment. Some agreements lived better without words. They worked in rhythm now. Vera handled business in town while Arthur managed daily operations. She trusted his judgment with the horses. He deferred to her knowledge of the land. Their partnership grew from necessity into something approaching friendship. Evening meals became ritual. Vera would set two places at her table. Arthur would wash at the pump and hang his hat by the door. They shared stories of their days, discussed plans for spring. Neither acknowledged how naturally they'd fallen into domestic patterns. Arthur learned about Vera's late husband through small details. His books still lined the shelves. His favorite coffee cup sat unused in the cupboard. She spoke of him with fondness but not the raw grief of fresh loss. Time had gentled her mourning into acceptance. Vera discovered Arthur's education through casual conversation. He quoted Shakespeare accurately, solved complex mathematical problems in his head. His grammar improved when he forgot to hide it. Whatever had driven him to desperate begging possessed layers she was still uncovering. The black stallion followed Arthur around the ranch now. No rope or halter required. The horse had chosen his human with Mustang certainty. Other hands watched this partnership with grudging respect. Breaking horses through violence was common. Earning their loyalty was rare. February brought a thaw that turned roads to mud and revealed winter's damage. Arthur spent long days repairing what ice and wind had broken. Vera rode out most afternoons to check his progress. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. "You never mention family," she said one evening. Arthur considered his words carefully. "Lost touch with most. The rest probably think I'm dead. Better that way. For them, yes." She didn't press for details. His past carried weight he wasn't ready to share, but she sensed shame beneath his silence. Guilt that time hadn't healed. March arrived with fall spring warmth. Buds appeared on the cottonwoods. Ice broke up along the creek. Arthur found excuses to work closer to the house. Vera discovered reasons to check his progress more frequently. The attraction had been building slowly. Glances that lasted too long. Hands that brushed when passing tools. Neither had spoken of it. Both felt the tension stretching between them. Then Dutch Van der Berg rode into Sweetwater Ridge. Arthur saw the riders from the north pasture. 5 men on good horses, moving with military precision. His blood turned to ice water when he recognized the man leading them. Dutch sat his white stallion with casual authority. His hair had gone gray at the temples, but his eyes held the same commanding intensity. Behind him rode Bill Williams and Javier Escula, men Arthur had once called friends. Arthur spurred his horse toward the ranch house. Vera needed warning. Dutch never traveled anywhere without purpose. His presence here meant trouble. He found Vera in her study, reviewing account books. She looked up at his urgency. "Riders coming. Men I used to know. You need to be careful around them." "What kind of men?" Arthur struggled with how much to reveal. His past with Dutch felt too complex for quick explanation, too shameful for easy confession. "The dangerous kind." Vera set down her pen. Arthur's fear was genuine, raw. Whatever connected him to these strangers ran deep. "Tell me what I need to know." Arthur's hands worked restlessly. How could he explain Dutch's philosophy? The man's belief that success belonged to those strong enough to claim it, that certain people deserved prosperity while others deserved nothing. "Their leader raised me, taught me everything I knew about the world. I thought he was the finest man alive. Thought. Until I learned what he really believed, what he was willing to do to people who got in his way." Hoofbeats echoed in the yard. Vera stood and smoothed her skirts. Whatever was coming, she would face it with dignity. Dutch knocked politely. His voice carried cultured charm when Vera opened the door. "Ma'am, Dutch Van der Berg. Might I have a word with one of your employees?" Vera's eyes found Arthur. He stood frozen behind her desk. His face had gone pale as old bone. "Arthur Morgan," Dutch continued. "Fine young man. We've been looking for him." "What's your business with him?" Dutch smiled. The expression held warmth and menace in equal measure. "Family business, you might say. Arthur here is my boy. Raised him since he was 12. Taught him everything he knows about ranching." Arthur stepped forward. His movements were stiff, reluctant. "Dutch, there's my boy. You look well, son. Country life agrees with you." The endearment carried poison beneath its sweetness. Dutch's eyes inventoried the comfortable house, the prosperous ranch beyond. Arthur had found something good here. That made it a weapon Dutch could use. "We should talk outside," Arthur said. "Nonsense. Mrs. Washington seems like reasonable people. She should hear what I have to say." Dutch removed his hat with theatrical courtesy. His presence filled Vera's parlor. Arthur watched him study the books, the piano, the signs of wealth and education. "I've come to offer Arthur his old position back, foreman of my operations, good wages, respect among the men, everything he gave up when he ran off." "I didn't run," Arthur said quietly. "No. Then what would you call it?" The question hung in the air. Arthur's jaw worked, but no words came. How could he explain his moral awakening to the man who'd shaped his original beliefs? Vera sensed undercurrents she didn't understand. These men shared history that ran deeper than employment. Arthur's stillness spoke of old wounds. Dutch's smile suggested he knew exactly where to apply pressure. "Arthur's happy here," she said finally. Dutch's attention shifted to her. His gaze was measuring, calculating. "I'm sure he is. You've built something impressive, Mrs. Washington. Remarkable what a determined person can accomplish." The compliment felt like a threat. Vera straightened under his scrutiny. "Arthur's earned his place here." "Oh, I don't doubt it. Arthur's always been gifted with animals and people, has a way of making himself indispensable." Arthur's hands clenched at his sides. Dutch was poisoning every word, making his genuine care for Vera sound like manipulation. "Think about my offer, son. You know where to find me." Dutch replaced his hat and moved toward the door. His men had been waiting in the yard, silent, watchful. "Mrs. Washington, a pleasure meeting you. I do hope we'll see each other again soon." After they'd ridden away, Vera turned to Arthur. His face was stone, his breathing shallow. "Tell me who that man really is." Arthur sank into a chair. The weight of his past pressed down on him. Dutch's arrival had shattered the peace he'd found here. Nothing would be simple anymore. "He's the man who made me everything I hate about myself." The confession came raw and quiet. Vera waited for more. "Dutch believes the world has natural order. Strong people deserve success. Weak people deserve whatever happens to them. He taught me those ideas were noble. But you don't believe that anymore." Arthur met her eyes. Brown and steady, holding no judgment. "No, but believing it for 20 years leaves marks, makes you complicit in things that haunt your dreams." Vera moved closer. Her hand touched his shoulder. "What does he want with you?" "To prove I still belong to him, that everything I've become here is temporary." Outside, evening shadows grew longer. The peaceful ranch felt different now, threatened. Arthur had brought his past to Vera's door whether he'd intended to or not. That night at dinner, they sat in heavy silence. Both knew Dutch's visit was only the beginning. Men like him didn't make long journeys for brief conversations. The foundation they'd built over winter suddenly felt fragile. Outside forces were gathering to test everything they'd created together. Arthur stared into the fire after Vera retired. Dutch would return, and next time he'd bring more than words. The accident started small. A section of fence found cut near the creek. Water troughs mysteriously fouled with mud and debris. Gate latches broken just enough to let cattle wander. Each incident could have been coincidence. Together they formed a pattern. Arthur rode the boundaries every morning now. His eyes swept the horizon for riders who shouldn't be there. The black stallion sensed his tension. The horse's ears stayed pricked forward, alert for danger. Vera noticed Arthur's new vigilance. She asked no questions. His behavior told her everything necessary. Dutch's visit had been reconnaissance. Now came the siege. The next incident was less subtle. 20 head of cattle were found 2 miles south of the ranch, spooked and scattered across broken ground. It took Arthur and 2 hands most of the day to gather them. One cow had cut her leg on sharp rocks. She would limp for weeks. That evening, Vera found Arthur cleaning his rifle in the barn. Oil and steel filled the air with familiar scents. His movements were methodical, professional. "You think they'll escalate?" Arthur didn't look up from his work. "Dutch believes in pressure. Apply it gradually until people break." "What's his endgame? Make you sell cheap? Make me come crawling back? Prove he was right about natural order?" Vera watched his hands work the cleaning rod, steady despite everything. Arthur had faced this kind of harassment before, probably participated in it under Dutch's guidance. How many others has he done this to? Arthur's hands stilled. The question cut deep. "More than I like to remember." The admission hung between them. Vera saw shame in his posture, the weight of old sins pressing down on his shoulders. "But you stopped." "Not soon enough." She moved closer. Her presence was steady warmth in the cool barn air. "You're stopping him now." Arthur met her eyes, brown and determined. She wasn't backing down despite the escalating threats. Her courage steadied something loose inside him. That night, Vera showed Arthur her study's hidden compartment. Behind false books lay a collection of documents, newspaper clippings, property records, witness statements written in careful script. "I've been tracking Dutch's activities for 8 months, every suspicious property transfer, every family that sold suddenly, every business that failed after he showed interest." Arthur stared at the evidence. Vera had documented a pattern of systematic intimidation spanning 3 territories. Dozens of families driven from their land, their property absorbed into Dutch's growing empire. "Why didn't you go to the law? Territorial judges are elected. Dutch contributes generously to campaigns." Arthur understood. Justice was another commodity Dutch had learned to purchase. The evidence was damning but worthless without honest courts to hear it. Federal marshals would need jurisdiction. Local crimes fall to local law. Vera had thought this through carefully. She'd been preparing for Dutch's attention long before Arthur arrived. His presence had accelerated the timeline but not changed the fundamental conflict. Over the following weeks, the pressure increased. Fences were cut more frequently. Water sources were contaminated with dead animals. Ranch hands quit after receiving anonymous warnings. The remaining workers demanded higher wages for hazardous duty. Arthur countered each move with quiet efficiency. He repaired damage faster than Dutch could create it, installed better locks, organized watch schedules. His knowledge of Dutch's methods became their best defense, but the harassment was working. Vera's expenses climbed while her income dropped. Scattered cattle meant lower weights at market. Stressed animals produced less milk. Fear made everything cost more. Town attitudes shifted as well. Shopkeepers grew nervous about extending credit. Bank President Micah Bell started mentioning her loan terms more frequently. Even friendly faces began suggesting she should consider Dutch's inevitable offer. The breaking point came during a spring thunderstorm. Lightning split the sky while Arthur rode the north pasture. The black stallion shied suddenly. A rifle shot cracked through the thunder. Arthur threw himself from the saddle as a second bullet whined overhead. The shots came from a ridge line 200 yards away. Professional distance for a skilled marksman. Close enough to kill if that was the intention. The message was clear. Next time might not be a warning. Arthur found 3 shell casings on the ridge. Good brass, expensive ammunition. The shooter had waited for the storm to mask the sound, planned the ambush carefully. That evening, Arthur confronted the inevitable choice: stay and escalate the conflict, or leave before Vera paid for his presence with her life. He found her on the front porch, watching storm clouds dissipate over the valley. Lightning still flickered in the distance. Thunder rolled across the mountains. "They shot at me today." Vera's hands tightened on her coffee cup. She'd heard the distant rifle cracks during the storm, had hoped they were hunters. Warning shots. This time, she nodded. Both understood the implications. Dutch was raising stakes, testing Arthur's resolve. Maybe I should go. Vera turned to face him. Rain still beaded on the porch roof. Droplets caught lamplight from the windows. Is that what you want? Arthur studied her face. Months of shared work had taught him to read her expressions. She was afraid but not defeated, worried but not broken. No, but wanting something and being able to keep it are different things. Dutch is counting on that attitude. She was right. Dutch's strategy depended on his opponent surrendering before real fighting began. Fear was his most effective weapon. He'll keep pushing until something breaks. Then we push back. Vera's voice carried steel. She'd built this ranch through determination and careful planning. Dutch represented everything she'd fought against. Backing down would validate his philosophy about who deserved success. Arthur felt something shift inside his chest. The fear remained, but purpose settled alongside it. Vera wasn't just defending property. She was defending the idea that decent people could build good lives through honest work. All right, but we do this smart. Dutch has resources we don't. We have advantages too. She was thinking of her documentation. The pattern of crimes Dutch believed was hidden, evidence that could destroy him if presented to the right authority. That night they planned their counterattack around Vera's dining table. Maps spread between coffee cups, documents arranged in careful stacks, two people deciding to fight instead of flee. Outside, spring wind rattled the windows. The thawing ground would soon be firm enough for heavy travel. Dutch would move more aggressively once the roads cleared. Arthur cleaned his rifle again while Vera copied her most important documents: insurance against fire or theft. Multiple versions stored in different locations. Neither spoke of the growing attraction between them. The shared danger had intensified every glance, every accidental touch. But survival took precedence over romance. They could explore deeper feelings if they lived through Dutch's campaign. The war was beginning in earnest now. Arthur's knowledge of Dutch's methods would be tested against the man who taught them. Vera's careful documentation would either save them or make her a more valuable target. By midnight, their plans were set. Arthur would ride to the territorial capital within the week. Federal Marshal Sadie Adler was honest and competent. She might have jurisdiction over Dutch's interstate activities. Vera would maintain the ranch while documenting any new harassment. Building an airtight case required meticulous record-keeping. The spring offensive was about to begin. Both sides were committed now. No middle ground remained between Dutch's vision of natural order and Vera's belief in earned justice. Arthur extinguished the lamps and walked toward the barn. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in months, he felt hope displacing fear. They had a plan. They had evidence. Most importantly, they had each other. The war was far from over, but the battle lines were finally drawn. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Sheriff John Marston delivered them personally, his face grim beneath his weathered hat. He dismounted slowly, reluctance in every movement. "Vera, Arthur," he nodded to each in turn, "got something you need to see." The documents bore official seals, territorial court letterhead. Dutch van der Berg's name appeared as plaintiff in neat legal script. The claim was simple and devastating. Vera's late husband had allegedly forged the original deed to the Sweetwater Ranch. Dutch was the rightful owner. Arthur read over Vera's shoulder. His breath came shallow. Dutch had been planning this maneuver for months, probably years. "Evidence?" Vera asked. Marston shifted uncomfortably. "Dutch produced the original survey documents. Claims your husband altered the boundary descriptions. Judge reviewed it yesterday." "Which judge?" "Harrison, Dutch's cousin." The words fell like stones into still water. Corruption made legal. Justice perverted by family connections and political favors. "How long do we have?" 48 hours to vacate. "I'm sorry, Vera. I truly am." After Marston rode away, Vera and Arthur stood in heavy silence. The morning sun felt cold on their faces. Everything they'd built was dissolving into legal documents and false claims. "The federal marshal," Arthur said finally. "3 days' ride to the territorial capital. The roads are still soft from spring thaw." Arthur studied the horizon. Dutch's timing was perfect. The legal trap was closing just as travel became difficult. Even if Arthur reached Marshal Sadie Adler, he might not return before the eviction deadline. "I'll ride hard, change horses in Blackwater." Vera touched his arm. Her fingers were steady but cold. "He'll have men watching the roads. You won't make it 10 miles." Arthur knew she was right. Dutch had planned this campaign like a military operation. Every escape route would be covered, every ally compromised or intimidated. Then what? Vera walked to her porch railing. The ranch spread below them in morning light. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. The life she'd built from nothing was about to be stolen through legal fiction. "I have copies of all the evidence, hidden in 3 different locations. If something happens to me, the truth survives." Arthur heard finality in her voice. She was preparing for the worst outcome, making peace with loss. "Nothing's going to happen to you." She turned to face him. Her eyes held the same quiet intensity he'd seen that first night in the storm. "Dutch won't stop with eviction. I know too much about his other operations. I'm a threat as long as I'm breathing." The brutal assessment hung between them. Dutch had built his empire through systematic intimidation. Witnesses didn't survive long enough to testify. "Then we both go, start over somewhere else." "With what money?" "Dutch will claim everything. The cattle, the horses, even personal possessions. Legal theft sanctioned by corrupt courts." Arthur felt the familiar weight of helplessness. The same crushing sensation he'd experienced watching Dutch destroy other families. The difference was his own heart was breaking now. That afternoon, Vera gave Arthur her most precious possessions. Her late husband's wedding ring, gold enough to buy passage anywhere in the territory. Documents proving her education and business experience. "For the journey," she said simply. Arthur stared at the ring. Heavy gold worn smooth by years of honest work. Vera was giving him everything of value she possessed. "I can't take this. You're the only one who can reach Marshal Adler, the only one who knows enough about Dutch's methods to make a convincing case." Her logic was sound, but the sacrifice felt enormous. She was trusting him with her entire future, her only chance at justice. "What if I don't make it back in time?" "Then you keep riding. Find somewhere Dutch's name means nothing. Build the life you deserve." Arthur closed his fingers around the ring. The metal was warm from her touch, a lifetime of memories compressed into circular gold. "I'm coming back. I know you'll try." That evening, they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring separation and danger. Tonight was all they had. "I should have told you sooner," Arthur said quietly. "Told me what?" "That I love you." Vera's hand found his in the gathering darkness. Her fingers interlaced with his calloused ones. "I know, I love you too." The words settled between them with perfect naturalness. No dramatic declarations, just truth spoken simply in the face of approaching loss. They held each other as stars emerged overhead. The physical comfort was precious but secondary. The real intimacy lay in their complete trust. 2 broken people who'd found wholeness together. Arthur left before dawn. The black stallion carried him into gray morning light. Behind them, the ranch slept in false peace. Ahead lay 3 days of hard riding through hostile territory. Vera watched from her bedroom window until horse and rider disappeared into distance. Then she dressed carefully and began her own preparations. If Dutch's men came early, she would face them with dignity. The first day passed without incident. Arthur pushed hard across open country, avoiding main roads where ambushes waited. The stallion's endurance was remarkable. The horse seemed to understand the urgency. That evening, Arthur spotted riders on a distant ridge. 3 men silhouetted against the sunset. They made no attempt to hide their presence. Dutch wanted him to know he was being hunted. The second day brought closer pursuit. Arthur heard hoofbeats echoing from canyon walls. saw dust clouds that moved too purposefully to be wild horses. The trap was tightening with each mile. Meanwhile at the ranch, Dutch arrived with legal documents and armed men. He was courteous but implacable. Vera had 12 hours to gather personal items and leave. Everything else belonged to him now. Vera packed carefully. A few dresses, her husband's books, the original documents proving her legitimate ownership. Dutch's men watched but didn't interfere. They seemed almost embarrassed by the charade. Dutch himself toured the property with proprietary satisfaction. He examined the improved buildings, counted the healthy cattle, calculated the value Arthur's work had added to his acquisition. "Fine operation," he told Vera over dinner. "Your husband built something lasting. Shame about the legal complications." His tone suggested genuine regret. Dutch was capable of destroying lives while maintaining perfect manners. The combination made him more dangerous than crude brutality. By the third day, Arthur was within 20 miles of the territorial capital. The pursuing riders had fallen behind during a difficult mountain crossing. Hope began building in his chest. Then the black stallion stepped in a prairie dog hole. The horse went down hard. Arthur rolled clear, but the damage was immediate and obvious. The stallion's right front leg was broken. The brave animal tried to rise and collapsed again. Arthur knelt beside his friend. The horse's dark eyes were bright with pain but still trusting, still hoping his human could fix this problem. There was no choice. Arthur drew his pistol and placed it behind the stallion's ear. One shot ended the suffering. The sound echoed across empty grassland. Arthur gathered his saddlebags and began walking, 20 miles on foot. Less than 24 hours until Vera's eviction. Marshal Adler was his only hope now. Behind him, smoke rose from the Sweetwater Ranch. Dutch was burning something, probably evidence of Vera's legitimate ownership, destroying the truth one document at a time. Arthur quickened his pace. His legs ached, but determination drove him forward. Each step was a prayer, each mile a desperate gamble against time and distance. The territorial capital appeared on the horizon as the sun reached its zenith. Arthur stumbled through dusty streets toward the marshal's office, his vision blurred from exhaustion and dehydration. Marshal Sadie Adler looked up as Arthur collapsed against her desk. Her sharp eyes took in his condition, the desperate urgency radiating from every line of his body. "Marshal," Arthur gasped, "I need your help." Marshal Sadie Adler studied the documents Arthur had spread across her desk. Her weathered hands moved carefully through Vera's evidence. Newspaper clippings, property records, witness statements written in precise script. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "Years, maybe decades." Vera documented 8 months of it. Adler's jaw tightened as she read. The pattern was clear. Systematic intimidation followed by legal theft. Dozens of families driven from their land through corruption and fear. Judge Harrison signed the eviction order. Dutch's cousin. The fix was in from the start. Adler stood and reached for her hat. Her badge caught afternoon sunlight streaming through dusty windows. "Federal court has jurisdiction over interstate fraud. We ride now." They commandeered the fastest horses available. Adler's authority opened doors and loosened tongues. Arthur had been right to trust her. She was everything Dutch's bought judges weren't. The ride back to Sweetwater Ridge stretched Arthur's endurance beyond breaking. His body screamed for rest, but his heart drove him forward. Vera was facing Dutch alone. Every minute mattered now. They reached the valley as the sun touched the western mountains. Smoke rose from the ranch house chimney. Dutch's men were visible in the yard, too many of them, too well armed. Arthur's chest tightened when he saw Vera on the porch. She stood straight and calm, her dignity intact despite everything. Dutch sat in her rocking chair. The gesture was calculated insult. Marshal Adler rode directly into the yard. Her presence changed everything immediately. Federal authority trumped territorial corruption. Even Dutch recognized the shift in power. "Gentlemen," Adler said quietly, "I understand there's a property dispute here." Dutch rose smoothly. His smile was diplomatic, but his eyes showed strain. "Marshal, Dutch van der Berg, I believe there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I have evidence of systematic fraud across 3 territories. Interstate crimes fall under federal jurisdiction." Arthur dismounted behind Adler. His legs nearly buckled from exhaustion, but he forced himself to stand straight. Vera's eyes found his across the yard. Relief and love passed between them without words. Dutch's composure cracked slightly. He hadn't expected Arthur to reach federal authority. The plan had accounted for territorial corruption, but not honest law enforcement. "I have legitimate court orders," Dutch protested, "issued by your cousin, based on forged evidence. Mrs. Washington has documented your entire operation." Adler produced the copied documents. Vera's months of careful investigation spread before Dutch's eyes. His expression went cold when he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. "You can't prove those accusations." "Actually, I can. Your former associate here is prepared to testify about your methods." Arthur stepped forward. His voice was steady despite his exhaustion. "I participated in this scheme for years. I know every detail of how you steal land from honest people." Dutch's mask finally fell away. The cultured gentleman became something uglier, more desperate. "Arthur's a known criminal. His word means nothing. Maybe not alone, but combined with this evidence, it's more than sufficient for federal prosecution." Marshal Adler's hand rested casually on her pistol grip. Dutch's men shifted nervously. They'd signed on for intimidation, not federal charges. "Mr. van der Berg, you're under arrest for interstate fraud, conspiracy, and criminal intimidation." The words carried finality. Dutch's empire was crumbling beneath federal authority. His carefully built network of corruption meant nothing against honest law enforcement. Bill Williams and Javier Escula backed away from their leader. They'd followed Dutch's vision of natural order, but weren't willing to face federal prison for it. One by one, his gang melted away into the evening shadows. Dutch accepted the handcuffs with bitter dignity. His dream of systematic oppression was ending in public humiliation. Everything he'd built through fear and corruption was dissolving. "This won't stand," he said quietly. "There are bigger forces at work than one marshal." "Maybe, but today justice wins." Adler led Dutch toward her horse. The man who'd terrorized countless families was just another prisoner now. His power had been an illusion built on others' fear. Arthur and Vera stood together in their yard as the dust settled. The ranch was theirs again. The legal theft had been exposed and reversed, but the real victory was deeper than property ownership. They'd chosen each other over safety, fought together instead of running separately, built something strong enough to survive external assault. That evening, they sat on their porch watching stars emerge over the valley. The crisis had passed, but its lessons remained. Love required courage. Justice demanded sacrifice. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of odds. "What happens now?" Vera asked. "We rebuild. Make this place everything it was meant to be." Arthur's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers interlaced with perfect familiarity. The desperate proposal that had brought them together seemed like ancient history now. 6 months later, the Sweetwater Ranch thrived under their joint management. Arthur's name appeared alongside Vera's on the legal documents, true partnership in every sense. The territorial corruption that had enabled Dutch was being systematically dismantled. His victims were receiving justice and compensation. The network of fear he'd built was crumbling beneath federal investigation. On a crisp autumn morning, Vera found Arthur repairing fence posts in the north pasture. He worked with quiet satisfaction. The black stallion's offspring grazed nearby. Life continuing despite past losses. Vera approached slowly. Her movements were careful now, protective of the growing weight beneath her dress. Arthur looked up as she reached him. "You kept your promise," she said softly. Arthur set down his hammer. Confusion flickered across his weathered features. "Which one?" "All of them. You worked for me, gave me strong children, stayed when staying was dangerous. Arthur's hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly, new life growing from their impossible beginning. The desperate bargain struck in mud and rain had become foundation for lasting love. "I reckon I got the better end of that deal, Mrs. Morgan." She smiled at the name. They'd married quietly in the spring. No grand ceremony, just simple vows spoken before honest witnesses. The ranch spread around them in golden morning light. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. The mountains stood eternal against blue sky. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd nearly lost. Their love had grown from mutual respect and shared struggle, from choosing each other repeatedly when choosing was difficult. The most unlikely beginning had led to the most beautiful ending. Arthur pulled Vera close. Her head rested against his shoulder. Their child moved between them, three hearts beating in perfect rhythm. The desperate cowboy who'd begged for work had found everything he'd never dared to hope for. The proud widow who'd risked everything on a stranger had discovered love worth any gamble. Together, they'd built more than just a successful ranch. They'd proven that decent people could triumph over corruption, that love could flourish in the harshest conditions, that some promises were worth keeping no matter the cost. The Montana wind carried their contentment across the healing land. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.